guys, how you doing? Welcome to episode 9 of Sanj Surati Talks. We have been getting so many cool responses since the last podcast, which we did with Farron Blackburn. I've got a fantastic guest for you today. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Dan Winch.
Very pleased to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
How you doing, buddy? You okay?
I'm good and flattered by your introduction. Thank you ever so much for your kind words.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show. I know you're a busy chap. There's going to be quite a few people on here listening that don't know much about you. It would be really good to get an idea of who you are and where you're from.
Yeah, so my love of the industry, or my beginning in the industry, came about through being rejected from all 6 university media courses that I'd applied to, and I ended up scratching my head thinking, goodness, wouldn't it be interesting to approach the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School, where I'd done a work experience as a kid, and had a love of theatre as a kid. You know, I was taken to the theatre with my brother and sister a lot, and so I was very lucky to be accepted onto a stage management and technical theatre course at the Bristol Old Vic, which is a 2-year course. It was a high national diploma, and not a million miles away from where I lived in Somerset with the family, and went and did that, and that was about 20 years ago now. It would have been 23 years ago. Now I've been in the industry for about 20 years, and basically that course focused predominantly on theatre production, mainly on stage management, and then clues in the title, technical theatre, so lighting, sound, prop making, set design, lighting design. It encompassed so many things, and it was also part of the core syllabus to explore TV as well, television, and it was at a time 23 years ago when we were just beginning to sort of get into that sort of golden, what we now kind of can see as a sort of golden era of television drama, but I hadn't had any experience in it, and I didn't really know enough about it to even know what the job roles were. You know, I was familiar with theatre because we always went as a family, and that was kind of familiar territory to me, more than TV and film would have been at that age, and so I was intrigued. I was one of the youngest ones on the course. There were 30 of us on the course, and there was various mature students, and I think I was the sort of second youngest there on the course, and all I kept thinking was I'd love to learn more. I'd love to know more about TV and about film. And I remember this opportunity came up to did anybody want to go and help be a runner on this short film that was being filmed over the Easter holidays in what would have been my last term before graduation, and through the time at Bristol, you're on different productions. So at that point in time, I was finishing on a touring production as a stage manager, or as the stage manager, and going into the final term, I was going to be working on one of the shows at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre Royal. So I was certainly able to fit in some experience on this short film. So I agreed, and I thought others would probably want to do it as well, but actually I was the only one. I was very lucky. Very lucky. I rocked up, and it was just me with the crew that had been assembled by this Bristol-based producer, and I absolutely loved it. I very quickly realised and became aware that the skills between TV, between theatre, and the transferable skills across to TV and film are significant and huge. You know, there's a massive sort of similarity in what we do, and how we work, and how we create a sort of creative bubble within which to work, a consistent space within which a director can realise her or his vision, and that really excited me. I guess I'd always been familiar with, working within a controlled theatrical environment where you know where your wings are, you're going to close the doors and it's going to be completely quiet. Cut to, you're on the street in the middle of Bristol and you're trying to, wrangle pedestrians and traffic and all sorts. And that was really exciting. The unknown element of what we do in the industry really, really excites me. So I really got a taste for it on that short film experience. I don't know what happened to that short film, but it led me on to getting some work experience on Casualty, which filmed in Bristol 20 years ago. And I'd filmed in Bristol. It was part of sort of historically part of what made Bristol a sort of recognised drama hub, if you like.
Yeah.
Not in the current sort of drama hub terms, but certainly back then, filming out of London, Casualty was one of the big, and still is, one of the most recognised continuing drama series on our boxes. And so that was a wonderful opportunity to have right on my doorstep to go and do some work experience on, and so did that. And as we came towards graduation, the school were brilliant. They were not they never, there was never any discouragement away from sort of exploring the unknown. I'd been trained as a stage manager and a technical theatre I guess trainee entry level, I guess I would imagine then. But this was new territory, that I wanted to explore, and it was just purely by luck, really, that the first assistant director that had been on the short film that I went and helped on as a runner got in touch and asked would I be interested in being considered to be a third assistant director on it was a 2-part drama for BBC Wales.
Right.
So not a million miles away actually from Bristol at the time, and Wales, another drama centre out of London, and I was like, yeah, great, let me at it. All I could think at the time was the words director and assistant are in the title. That would be a good thing. And it didn't really kind of land with me at the time, kind of getting my head around exactly what the role of a third assistant director was or meant. All I thought was someone had seen the sort of ability to put their faith in, an ability to put their faith in me. And I was excited by that. I was thinking, great. So I agreed and accepted the job and trotted off to Wales when I graduated to go and do this 2-part drama. And what
was the name of it?
It was called Score. It was really wonderful actually. It was I remember it so fondly. The cast were brilliant. The story was just great. Tonally it was lighthearted. It wasn't nobody was dying, no one died. It was a murder mystery, and it was filmed largely on the banks of the Severn Estuary. There was a big sort of football element to it. I guess the clue was in the title there. Sue Johnston. I'm trying to think, Alan Armstrong. The wonderful cast. And so I thought, this was great. It was so exciting, and I didn't, there was a lot I didn't know about what I was meant to be doing, and it was a real case of being thrown in at the deep end, and I really messed some things up. I didn't deliver on a lot of fronts, and I could tell as I was going along, and I was desperate to, right my wrongs through the course of this shoot, which must have been about 5 or 6 weeks shoot, and anyway, I found it exhilarating. I had some there was big crowd scenes, and as a third assistant director, your responsibility is to direct these crowd scenes, and I didn't think, I'd no experience about directing, and certainly would never have never have thought of myself at the theatre school in that role of as stage management of a sort of directing demand when you sidestep into TV. And there's a lot of similarity, there's a lot of parallel between the assistant directing department, under which the floor runner and the third assistant director obviously sit, and the stage management team theatre. In both instances, you're organising, you're running, you're controlling the environment, and you're the momentum behind any given day in production. And anyway, I loved it and got to the end of that job, and I had this, again, a sort of sudden realization moment of thinking, my God, I've done one, and I was very lucky to get that. Where's the next one gonna come from? And that was sort of welcome to the world of what it is to be freelance, because we are in the TV industry, we're largely all freelance on the crew side. There was a time when there would be staff assistant directors within Granada and BBC and things, but that was long gone at that point. And then again was very lucky that another contact from that same short film that I'd done while I was at the drama school got in touch, and she was an associate producer on Silent Witness, and this was when Silent Witness was at the time with Amanda Burton, and it was produced very much as it was more event TV rather than drama series, actually, as it is now, continuing drama series. While it was continuing and a drama series at the time, it was done in a much more filmic way. We shot on 16mm. Wow. The stories were more contained within one or two episodes rather than spread out across numerous episodes. It was an exciting. I knew of the show. I'd seen the show. It was really exciting to be approached by a drama series that I was familiar with and respected and enjoyed watching, and certainly, with another actress such as Amanda Burton, who I knew of, and that was all exciting to me back then, and so I accepted that job, and off I trotted for another incredible experience, shortly after that first one, and so those opportunities kept cropping up and kept on arising, and as I say, it was all to do with a bit of luck, a lot of hard work, chatting to people, being in the right place at the right time. And I sort of, a couple of jobs in, was asked about going and working on a project called Sunday. It was written by Jimmy McGovern about the Bloody Sunday massacre in Northern Ireland.
Yep.
And actually they had I think the circumstances, if I remember correctly, were that they had a full team of assistant directors, but they needed additional support. We often do that on shows with complex crowd scenes or lots of different locations that might require additional unit filming. Often you need to bolster your team along the way, and they certainly found that. And I agreed, and off I went to Northern Ireland, to Derry, to join the team over there for the filming of Sunday. And it was absolutely. I mean, I think if there was a job that I look back on and think, what was the job that helped me form what I then subsequently strove to work on going forward, the sorts of dramas that really got me excited, the sorts of dramas that really felt I could put my heart and soul into, and that really made me feel like I was going to give my best work, and where I wanted to put my time and energy. And I realised on that it was shows that have a factual basis to them and a factual background to them. It was so utterly compelling, incredibly rewarding, it was just extraordinary, working alongside people that had relatives affected, in some cases who had died in the events of Bloody Sunday, and you're there working with them, creating recreating in many instances the sequences and the scenes that had led to those circumstances. It was incredibly, I'm trying to find the words. It was exhilarating, but it made me feel something I'd not felt up to that point. In my heart and bones, I just thought, yes, this is the sort of drama that I'd like to do.
So when you were studying theatre, could you have imagined that you would be working within TV and film as a producer, working on things that were specific to factual-based programs?
No, it never occurred. It never really occurred to me, to be honest. Actually, Sanj, it came up over a period of time.
Wow.
With those early experiences that I had in TV, particularly on Sunday, producing was something that had never really cropped up on my sort of career agenda. I'll be totally honest. I initially thought, when I did that first job with BBC Wales, that assistant directing would be my thing, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, and I look back on the experiences I had, because to just be clear, I spent many years working my way up the assistant directing ladder, effectively from third assistant director up the ladder to second and to first assistant director. And you, as a first assistant director, those of you who aren't familiar, you run the set. You're the one organising and scheduling that that given shoot for weeks in advance of the shoot, and then you're there on the day, stood in the centre of it all. Basically, you're like a sort of conductor to an orchestra. You're right at the centre of a crew and a cast. You're the sort of chief communicator, effectively. And communication can mean so many things on a TV set. It's and a film set equally. But largely, it's a momentum. It's instigating and maintaining a positive momentum in a set that also has to have sensitivity to the scenes you're shooting. You have to change the way you deliver effectively a performance as an assistant director when you're instructing the crew and guiding the crew and calling action and asking for quiet and all those things. You have to make sure that you capture each and everyone's attention at any given moment in order to keep the show motoring along and the production of that show motoring along. And over time, I loved, I've got so many great memories of being a first assistant director on set, and I loved all of them. And there were tricky situations, particularly abroad. I worked in Tunisia a lot, and it's just harder it's harder in certain places around the world because you seem to have so many more people on a crew sometimes to wrangle when you're abroad, and it's just the way different countries will work, and that's true of America. It's true of countries in Europe. It's certainly true of countries in Tunisia and Malaysia where I've worked, and you just have in many cases more people to do one job, and that's just the way those processes in those countries have mastered those particular jobs. So you've got sometimes upwards of 150 to 200 people to run, and it was and then you can have actors and extras, and it's again, as I said before with Sunday, it was exhilarating to be at that sharp end on the set. And what then triggered off my thoughts about producing, I guess, was this always being something in me that's wanted to sort of push myself and look to ensuring I'm challenging what I'm doing. I'm expanding my skill set and making sure I'm learning all the time, and every job's different. With each job, you always learn something. Whatever job role you're in, and I can just remember that time looking at there was a job I did a job I was doing in Hungary, and I was watching how the producer was working, and I was listening to everything the producer was saying, and I something in me thought, I could see myself trying to have a go at that conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd be any good at it, and I certainly admired the way in which I was listening and observing it being had. But I thought, with the skills I've built up and the knowledge and the experiences that I've had in order to gain those skills, I just felt I need to try and think about giving it a go. And
what was the production you were working on in Hungary?
So I was doing it was a project called Birdsong, Sebastian Faulk's World War One drama, and that was one of the last things I first assistant directed, and I'd worked with that producer three times actually, and always admired the way in which she worked, and yet, as I say, I was always keen to challenge myself. I always have been. I've sort of naturally got this want to sometimes take myself out of my comfort zone in order to try and move in a different direction, or move forwards, or whatever that happens to be. But I happened to be in an office for a company that I'd worked with as an assistant director, and they were holding auditions for children for a particular script that they were developing, and that particular project had, like any project, it had a very specific set of circumstances which needed to come together in the perfect way. The stars needed to align absolutely perfectly in order for that project to be able to happen. And I just thought, that sounds like I could be the person, or I could certainly be a person to help aligning those stars. And so I just literally stuck my neck out there and said, would you give me a chance to produce this project with the writers, directors? There was two. It was a writing directing duo, and I'd love to give it a go. I don't claim to be an expert, but I'm willing to learn, and I'm certainly willing to give it my all, and I feel I can help with the challenges that this particular project presents. And then sure enough, I found myself doing exactly that, and it was a project called a film actually called What We Did on Our Holiday.
Yeah.
And it was with Billy Connolly, and
wow.
We also cast David Tennant and Rosamund Pike and Ben Miller. It was It was just wonderful. It was interesting, when you look at the different in genres between film comedy, film drama, and then compare those with TV drama and TV comedy. And when it comes down to it, the way you set a production up is pretty much the same. It doesn't matter if you've got the biggest show in Hollywood that you're putting together, or the most low budget show on your doorstep. It's it all begins with the exact same starting point, which is thinking about who would be the right creative team to put this project where we need to get it, and pull this project together in the way we need to put it together. And
just as you said about being that conductor that manages the orchestra, that conducts the orchestra, which is a fantastic quote. Quick question: did you get to meet Billy Connolly?
Oh, I did, absolutely. Yeah. No, he's a lovely bloke. I mean, God, he's such a legend, as we know, and got to spend a lot of time with Billy. I mean, we were up for the large part of Billy's time, I'm just recalling, we were a lot of it was up on the west coast of Scotland.
Right.
And it wasn't a long shoot, but when you're in those shoot environments, as the listeners I'm sure will appreciate, you become like a family. You become very close and get to know each other very well. And Billy was brilliant. They all were. It was a wonderful cast, and the writers, directors, very much came from them as well in terms of the atmosphere that was created.
Right.
Andy and Guy, Andy Hamilton and Guy Jenkin, they are behind the brilliant hit that we know as Outnumbered, and their approach with Outnumbered was quite unique in terms of how they would sort of interweave non-scripted, improvisation work with scripted dialogue. And that was exactly how the work went about on the film as well. And so I got that experience under my belt, and very similar. There's a lot of parallels as you move from a role such as an assistant director to producing. As you say, my sort of analogy of assistant directing being like conducting the orchestra. It's also true of the producer, but you're sort of on a sort of more of a I guess more of an outside tier to the central set mechanisms, the goings on of the central set workings. That's not to say as producer that you're not there in the center of that set. You just have to have a protocol whereby the crew trained. The etiquette is you listen to that voice on the set that happens to be the assistant director with regards to the management of the day.
Yeah.
As a producer, you're there with many different roles of responsibility on any given day on set. From creative ones to health and safety ones. To again general sort of management, and morale, and being there and to show appreciation for everybody's hard work and determination to achieve the project you're pulling together, and so it's very similar producing to assistant directing in terms of uniting a team and uniting a group of people, encouraging people, supporting people, and that's what gets I strongly believe that's what gets the greatest work if you create the right atmosphere.
Your work speaks for itself. I mean, you've worked on some fantastic productions. I wanted to touch on A Very English Scandal, which won some great awards. First of all, talk to us about that project.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was incredibly lucky. Again, I'm going to keep using this word luck because it didn't change. Just so everyone's aware, when I've gone up through my career as an assistant director, and I've mentioned about being lucky in the early stages of my career, I consider myself incredibly lucky, in these recent times as well, because there's projects floating around that you sort of hear about, and you kind of admire certain writers that you'd love to work with, and actors and actresses that you'd love to have the opportunity to work with, and I was mindful. Very English Scandal was on my radar because the executive producer, a guy called Dominic Treble-Collins, he'd pulled together Russell T Davies, Stephen Frears, and Hugh Grant in order to create a sort of the package of A Very English Scandal. Now that was quite, when you're reaching out to a director such as Stephen Frears for a television miniseries, that is a big deal. That is Stephen is effectively a brand. He's a hugely respected, iconic feature film director. And it was a real coup. Dominic did brilliantly to get him aboard the project. He did brilliantly to get Russell T Davies aboard the project. Two titans of their industries. Russell of TV and Stephen of feature film, but not exclusively. The great thing about our industry is there is a massive crossover, and more so than a show such as A Very English Scandal, when you've got the bringing together of people with those vast experiences in those different fields, but ones that are actually, when you break it down, were achieved in exactly the same ways. It might sound odd to people that the producer then comes in after those elements are in place. And I find myself constantly talking about this, actually, because it changes vastly in our industry as to when and where us as producers join projects. Some of us are involved through the development of projects and scripts. Others of us can become involved in a project once a script has been developed and is ready to take into physical production. Some producers will see a show from development and into physical production. They'll do both. Then in America, the producing role in the UK is actually referred to as an executive producer. The grades are actually called different names altogether. It's all very confusing. So over the years, it's become very confusing, actually, about when different producers join and what those different producers do. And so with this particular project, I'd been approached once those different elements, or at the point at which those guys had been brought onto the project, and that in itself was quite rare. And because it was a director such as Stephen Frears, that's not an easy engagement to make for any project. It must have been about June time, early June, when I got the approach, and that must have been, I think from memory it was 2017 now, and I was filming on another project at the time, and the aspiration was to start filming A Very English Scandal middle of September.
Right.
I remember. So actually, when I was approached, the run-up time was really quite a short period, actually, for what you would generally hope for pulling together a project. So it was, gorgeous. It was a challenge, and at the point at which I sat down at my desk for A Very English Scandal, scratching my head, thinking, God, who do I reach out to first to see about availability and interest to come and join us. Everybody had their summer holidays booked, and if they didn't have their summer holidays booked, as we know, the period in the year that's usually the most busy for filming is the summer. So a lot of people were already committed, were already busy on shoots. So it was a real job to pull together what I felt was going to be the ideal team. And of course, you do that with much discussion with the executive producers, so with Dominic, with Russell, with Stephen, and of course you do that collaboratively. As producer, you're right at the centre of all that. You're the driving sort of energy behind weighing up and considering, who's the best production designer, who's the best costume designer we can get, who's the best composer, the best makeup designer. In that instance, actually, Hugh Grant had actually flagged up his want for us to consider a wonderful makeup designer called Daniel Phillips. So that was an approach I could quickly make to try and establish, Daniel's availability and an interest in the project. So I haven't waffled too much about my joining the project, about how it can sometimes work. I guess compare it to other projects. What I'm perhaps more used to is being involved in a project at a stage when you haven't got a director on board.
Right.
So it was a little bit different for me, but of course the opportunity to work with someone like Stephen Frears, and indeed Russell and Dominic, was a golden one, and I didn't I take all opportunities with a pinch of salt in terms of how they're made up. I didn't feel like I was sort of losing any sort of part of your sort of creative ownership in being part of that team, in arriving, with Stephen Frears already in place. It was wonderful. It was absolutely brilliant, and to work closely with him. And Stephen works in a particular way, and I had to get my head around what that way was very quickly, in order that Stephen can be benefiting from a producer rather than somebody who's simply going to jump on a treadmill and go with the flow. That's not what a project like that needed. It needed a hell of a lot of wrangling in order to make many of those aspects achievable in a very busy filming environment. And while there's a lot of talk in our industry about COVID-19 aside, there's been much talk over the years up until the point about COVID, because now we're facing a slightly different challenge at the moment. But about the increases in TV budgets, the increased demand for TV content, from streaming services, etc. And I think the costs of just producing television drama in London, full stop, are huge. That's increased massively over the years, and to find new ways new and original ways of maintaining your ambition on screen is a challenge. Can be a challenge.
I can imagine. That production won a lot of accolades. How do you feel about those accolades, and what have they done for you?
Oh, well, incredibly proud. I'm so proud for everybody, really. It's wonderful when you can think. I guess the most wonderful thing is to think people have watched this show, and whenever we embark on any project, at whatever stage of the production, you're always thinking about the audience, and you're always thinking what's going to connect with an audience. How is an audience going to scrutinise and pull apart this project? And I guess that was no different with A Very English Scandal, and we scrutinised every aspect of it to try and ensure that the final product, the final show, was as high end, as high standards as we possibly could make it. And so when those awards happen, awards can be a funny thing. It's absolutely not the be all or end all, and shouldn't be, of a project. There's so much work out there, and so few awards to be able to be given out in respect of all the work there is to be acknowledged. That even to get nominations is lovely. It's a lovely sort of accreditation for the work you've done. But it doesn't mean everything. What means more to us is that there's been a connection made with an audience, that people are talking about it, that it's got people talking, that people have formed opinions off the back of it. And at the time, I remember, whenever English Scandal was going out, it really did create a bit of a buzz. It really got people chatting. It shone a light on a story that a lot of people weren't familiar with, myself included. Actually, prior to reading the script, I didn't know about the story. It was before my time, and before the time of a lot of people that it struck chords with, and I think that's the biggest reward at all. Would I feel disappointed if those nominations and awards were taken away? Of course. It's so lovely to be able to go and enjoy those things. It's a rare treat when we work so hard. We slog away for hours on end producing the work. That it's lovely when you can go to these events and see colleagues and catch up with friends. Not only from the show you're on, but from other shows, and that's always a lovely thing to do.
Amazing. That production did really well. There's going to be like a second season, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's a different story altogether.
Yeah.
Of course, I know I think there's a sort of poster associated with it, which is the Very English Scandal that we did, Norman Scott and Jeremy Thorpe. But yes, it's a different story, different writer, and will be a different team. But brilliant to see. There is a hunger there. I think more than ever. I think people love a true story, love to try and make sense of the madness in the world, and I think that'll always remain. I think people will always be interested in scandalous stories. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Quiz, which you and I have a kind of connection with, because I had a small featured role in the show. The show's done really well. I remember when it hit the airwaves over here in the UK, everyone was talking about it. I'm assuming it was a similar team to a Very British Scandal that worked on Quiz, because obviously you were involved in it and Stephen was involved in it again.
Well, that's correct. And like I was saying before about, the scenario in which you become attached or involved in a project differs vastly. It's always changing, and there's no sort of given format with how a producer can become involved in a project. That's very true of my involvement with Quiz. I was familiar with it. I'm familiar with the story, certainly, and familiar with James's play from when it was on in the West End. But interestingly, Stephen wasn't originally attached as director.
Right.
The project had been developed at Left Bank Pictures by producer Alice Pearce and Andy Harries, the owner of Left Bank Pictures and a fellow exec producer on the project. And it was purely down to the fact that I think as the show picked up momentum and as the development of the scripts unfolded and progressed, there was just a feeling and a thought, as with any show and with any busy company, that another pair of producing hands was going to be helpful in support to deliver what was an incredibly, to deliver and to realise what was an incredibly complex production.
Right.
On the face of it, to anyone watching, it might not appear perhaps as complex as it was for us to actually produce, but when you think about it, you've effectively got two different genres that you're producing within the one show. You've got to completely produce a game show within a drama, and doing that in a fresh and original way that maintains the nuance and the ambiguity of this story, which of course is essential in this particular story, was a real challenge. And of course I have a familiarity, get my words out there, with Stephen, the way Stephen works, and often with our timeline with development and pre-production, it can always be beneficial if you've got established relationships whereby you can not necessarily fast track certain conversations so much as understand what the starting point might be for somebody like Stephen. And so I very much worked incredibly closely with Alice Pearce, producer, on pulling together a plan. As Stephen Frears always says, it's about the plan. It's always about the plan. And I love that, it's great. And I quote Stephen saying that because I have such fond memories of the way in which he relies on the support of his producers to take responsibility for that plan.
Right.
In a way perhaps don't so much, but I love that because you've got that weight of responsibility, which is exciting. You're trusted to build the best creative plan possible for realizing a shared vision amongst the producers and the director and the writer, of course, James's wonderful script, and we strive to avoid compromise and to maintain the highest of standards in everything that we put on screen, and that's always really important for us. But it has to be and to feel appropriate and right for that particular project. And certain approaches that we took with Quiz wouldn't have been right and appropriate for the approaches we took on A Very English Scandal, and that's true of Broadchurch as well. When I worked on that, every show has a demand for an individual lightness of touch from a producing side to ensure that you're building it in the right creative way, and that might result in a different production designer, for example, or a different makeup designer, or a different costume design. And so I was very incredibly proud of the way. It's wonderful to have you with us.
Yes. So just to give a bit of background to everyone listening, I basically had a very small featured part in the last episode of the show. Just one thing I wanted to say, Dan, the show is awesome. Like, it was just very well put together.
Well, thank you so much, mate. And thank you so much for, being a part of it, and to everybody or anybody that did watch it and support the show. I certainly felt very much like James Graham and Alice and Andy Harries. And I should mention William Village as well, who was the producer of the original play, who'd taken, actually James had based the play on a book that was written about the events that we depict. And with all of us, we all had familiarity with the story. I remember it. It happened, 20 or so years ago, when I was just beginning in the industry. So I can remember it very well, as in terms of where I was in my life at the time. And it was a huge event. And I think one thing that's become really apparent in our showing of Quiz is just how many people were familiar with it, how many people are familiar with the show, but also how many people have sort of misremembered and misunderstood what happened. There was so much aspersion cast on the guilt of the Ingrams that there was this whole wonderful sort of underworld not disclosed, and elements of the court case that perhaps were not given quite the attention they should have been, in order to give the Ingrams a fair public representation in terms of what happened, basically. And I really hope, I feel we did, and I really hope that everybody feels that we did give a balanced presentation of both sides of the story.
Oh, it was brilliant. What I found quite interesting was just, as you said, it's almost 20 years old, the story, but just how the kind of morals of that story are still so relevant in today's society.
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's incredible, really. When we met the Ingram family, Charles and Diana, and they're such lovely people, and you become very aware very quickly that there's such a passion for the show. As we've showed in the drama, there was this whole group of people that had just this absolute passion for watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And at the end of the day, I've thought about it a lot, because our drama industry relies on people that have a passion for watching TV, whether it be drama or whether it be entertainment shows. So it's to be admired, and of course, things may or may not have happened, and that's all been part of the fun of the story. What isn't fun, and what has been very sad to sort of uncover and learn of, is the treatment of the Ingrams along the way, and the abuse they suffered, and taking it out of context, has been interesting, because actually it's not so incredibly disproportionate in so many ways, actually, in terms of what happened. Putting it in context, to be honest, it's incredibly sad and wrong what went on and what they were put through and what they had to endure.
How did you feel about the story before you started on the production, and how do you feel about that story now that production's aired?
Yeah, sure. God, I think it's it's an absolutely wonderful story. I mean, James Graham did such a good job of writing it as well. I mean, he did brilliantly, and it was as gripping to read as it was to watch on TV. It was weird, actually, because even when we watched the drama, and I must have seen it a million times, but I was still on the edge of my seat watching the actual game show elements, even though I knew what the answers were. How did I feel about the story? I think what you're getting at is, do I think they did it or not? And I think it's I think certainly something odd did happen, and I absolutely categorically don't think there was any coughing scam. I think, for me, that was too far fetched. I think particularly the fact we built the studio set based on the real ground plan of the original set. So it was all true distances. And I can't believe a world in which the close proximity of the people involved in this supposed coughing would have got away with this single thing if they were communicating via coughing. I mean, it's such a preposterous thought. But more so than that, I think I have an appreciation, as with anyone in the industry, yourself included, about the power of the edit and knowing just how much we can dictate in changing an edit, and knowing that key piece of evidence was accepted into a court case after it was highly edited.
Yeah,
seems morally, I don't know, it seems morally sort of impossible, let alone wrong. And so I feel a great deal of sympathy with the Ingrams. Do I think there were things that I still don't understand, and I think I'd need to understand more of to know 100% was anyone guilty or innocent? Yes. Do I think they're innocent of the coughing? Yes, I do. I don't think it was the coughing. But it was certainly, I'm as fascinated with the story now as I was, way back. But with a load more experience and knowledge of the TV industry under my belt, I feel in a better position to have an opinion on what went on than I would have done 20 years ago, that's for sure.
Wow. So we're just coming up towards the end of the show. Dan, I mean, everything you're saying has been awesome, and I'm sure everyone listening will get a lot from it. Just a couple of questions before we close off. The first one, how's COVID-19 affecting you and, what you do within the film and television industry?
Well, it's been a really interesting time. I've chatted to a lot of colleagues, and it's affected people in lots of different ways. Obviously, for productions that were filming, had to grind to a halt. I was very lucky in that sense, because I'd actually been involved with quiz right through the height of COVID, through the lockdown. When the lockdown kicked in, we were in the final stages of the marketing and press campaign for quiz. Obviously, that's the sort of work that you can do from home anyway. So there wasn't a demand and a need to go into the office. I've then been party to conversations about guidelines and about thoughts for getting drama filming up and running again, and it's really interesting because I do think, when you look at which sorts of shows have begun already and how they've begun, it's actually been the soaps. It's been the likes of Emmerdale and Coronation Street this week and EastEnders, and I think it's where high-end TV drama can really learn from, what those continuing drama series are doing in order to get underway. Where I think we're all mindful is that we don't want to be diluting what we know as high-end TV and to be in any way shortchanging the audience with anything other than the highest end TV production. And at the moment, there's still a little bit of trepidation about these guidelines and measures that are absolutely essential. Nobody disagrees with that, but we are continuing conversations to think about how we can ensure that the action which we shoot and achieve and the stories which we tell can still be done in as uncompromising a way as possible. And I think in terms of that's a great statement to make, but in terms of how we can physically then do something to maintain high-end TV, to answer that dilemma, it's about the stories we tell and about finding stories that lend themselves well to being told under the guidelines as they currently are in this current climate, without the compromises that we might have to make otherwise. But somebody asked me the other day, could you have filmed Quiz and A Very Young Scandal under these COVID guidelines? And in truth, no, you couldn't. There isn't any way on the world we could have filmed those shows without significantly changing the way in which we executed the plan and in terms of the content that we achieved. With a great deal of discussion, more time, more money, there is a version of those shows we could absolutely have achieved, but it wouldn't have been the one that was on the box, if that makes sense.
Right, okay. And just with regards to your production schedule at the moment, are you on hold, or are there projects happening at the moment? Where do you stand at the moment as a professional?
Of course, no, I'm very pleased to say, and I'm delighted to say, that what this period has given us is, in a way, it's given a sort of breather to the writers, and the development teams to have great focus time to be concentrating on developing scripts,
right,
without the burden of physical production. There's always a sort of race to try and get scripts finished in time to get them ready to get on set and to start filming. And when I think back to poor Chris Chibnall on Broadchurch, where we had Chris sort of locked in his, or I'd say we had Chris locked in a room. Chris had locked himself in a room at home, in order to achieve delivering the scripts that we needed to on the Broadchurch schedule. Whether it was that or it was any other project, there's always a great pressure on the writers to deliver their scripts from the point at which a project is greenlit to happen. It's never a case of having all your scripts up front and ready to go. Or I should say, rarely is it a case that you've got all your scripts up front and ready to go, fully developed, fully noted, and you're starting with a sort of clean run effectively. So I'm sure it won't change our process vastly once it begins, because with any script, development of a script never stops at the point at which you hit pre-production. The development of a script is ongoing through production, even through shooting. It's always an evolution of what's written on page. Or a constant working with the writer. When actors come aboard and actresses come aboard, there's a constant dialogue going on between you all about carving and evolving and finessing those scripts. So that will always be the case. But I do think this period has allowed that development process just a bit of breathing space, really, to try and get on the front foot. Physical production, as I say, lots of conversations have been ongoing about how to pick up where we effectively left off. A lot of shows just can't. A lot of shows now film abroad. film, incredibly ambitiously, whether that be in terms of the content on screen, whether it be, to take Normal People as an example, it's been highly talked about for its level of sexual content, and intimate content, I should say, and that is something that is a huge challenge to us now. I was reading something the other day about how, big productions, big feature films in Hollywood are thinking about how they can use computer animation to achieve visual effects effectively to achieve intimate scenes going forwards. And there's lots of different ideas bounding around about how we will achieve those sorts of sequences and that sort of content. So lots of conversations being had. As I say, though, it's brilliant to see the industry starting to crank things up again and starting to dust off, the filming gear and get back to where we were and to doing what we know we can do so brilliantly.
Amazing. Dan, you have been incredible. Thank you so much for your insight in, just everything that you've done and what you're doing. If anyone that's listening, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Do you know, probably via my Instagram. I'm on Instagram, Dan Winch Dan. I can be reached on there. Do you know, that's my only social media. I must confess that's...
No, that's totally fine. We'll put that in the liner notes if that's okay.
Of course, do. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Dan, you've been awesome. Thank you so much. Those of you that are listening, if you've enjoyed this, please do share on social media using the hashtag Sanj Surati Talks, all one word. Wherever you are, I hope you're safe, and whatever you're doing, be good.